I ordered a husband, not a gunman." She cried as the cowboy stepped off the train. Lila Chen had written the letter 3 times before she finally sealed it and walked to the post office without looking back. The first version was too desperate. The second was too cold. The third, she decided, was honest enough to work and careful enough not to scare anyone away. She was 26 years old. She ran a laundry business on the edge of Duskwell, New Mexico, and she needed a husband. Not for love. Not yet, anyway. She needed one the way a fence needs a post, to hold something important in place. The advertisement in the Western Matrimonial Gazette had been her sister's idea. Ruth had read about it in a letter from a friend in Colorado who said a woman named Harriet Boone had found herself a perfectly decent schoolteacher through the paper, and that he did not drink or gamble and had all his teeth. Lila had laughed at that. Then she had stopped laughing and thought about it for 2 weeks straight. Then she had written the letter. She described herself plainly. 5 feet and 3 inches. Dark hair that she kept pinned up during working hours and let down only when she was alone, which was most of the time. She could cook well enough, though she was better with numbers. She owned her building outright, had $40 in savings, and had no intention of giving up the laundry business even after marriage. She wrote that last part in ink dark enough to be unmistakable. She underlined it once. She also wrote that she did not need a man who was handsome or exciting. She needed one who was steady and kind and willing to build something together on ground that was already half solid. She got 7 letters back. 2 were from men who could barely write and whose proposals smelled faintly of whiskey through the envelope. 1 was from a widower in Arizona with 4 children under the age of 8, which was more than she could take on. 1 was politely mad. 2 were decent but felt wrong in the same way a boot feels wrong when it is the right size, but the wrong shape. The 7th letter was from a man named Cole Whitmore, and she read it 4 times. He wrote with a steady hand. He said he was 31. He said he had been ranching in Wyoming for 8 years, but that the land had gone bad in a drought, and he was looking to start over somewhere new. He did not make promises he couldn't keep. He said he was not a poet and could not pretend to be one, but that he was a man who showed up and did what he said he would do, and that if she found that to be enough of a beginning, he was willing to come to Duskwell and let her decide for herself whether he was the kind of man she was looking for. He also said, at the end, that he had read her letter carefully, and that a woman who underlined her intentions was a woman worth respecting. She wrote back the same evening. They exchanged 4 more letters over 6 weeks. He told her about the ranch and the drought, and how he had watched his cattle die one by one that last summer, and had felt something go quiet inside him that had not fully come back yet. She told him about coming to New Mexico from San Francisco at 17 with her father, who had died 2 years later of a fever, and how she had taken over the laundry because there was nothing else, and then had kept it because it turned out she was good at it. They were careful letters, honest but careful, the kind you write to someone you are starting to trust, but have not yet earned the right to trust completely. At the end of the 6th letter, Cole Whitmore said he would like to come to Duskwell if the offer was still open. He said he could be there on the 14th of September on the afternoon train from Santa Fe. He said she should not feel obligated to anything when he stepped off that train. He would understand if she took one look at him and decided it wasn't right. She appreciated that more than she could explain. She told her only friend in town, a Mexican woman named Dolores, who ran the dry goods store 2 buildings down, about the plan. Dolores crossed herself and said a prayer, and then asked if the man was handsome. Lila said she didn't know. Dolores said that was probably better. Handsome men, Dolores said from personal experience, had too many options and exercised them too freely. The morning of the 14th, Lila opened the laundry at 6 as always, took in a pile of shirts from the hotel down the street, worked through the morning without stopping for more than a cup of coffee, and told herself that this was just a business arrangement and that the fluttering in her chest was nothing more than practical nervousness about an important decision. She had herself almost convinced by noon. She closed the laundry at 2, changed into her second-best dress, which was a clean dark blue that she thought made her look less tired than she actually was, and walked to the train station. The platform was not crowded. A family with a wagon was waiting for something to be unloaded. The station master, a round little man named Peters, was eating a biscuit and reading a week-old newspaper. 2 cowboys she didn't recognize were leaning against the wall, with their hats pulled low. The train came in at 3:15, which was actually on time for once, and Lila stood straight and watched the passengers step down. She saw him before she saw the problem. He was tall, broader in the shoulder than she had imagined from his letters, though she wasn't sure why she had imagined anything at all. He had dark hair that needed cutting and a face that had been weathered by too many years of sun and wind into something that was not quite handsome, but was very solid and very serious. He was wearing a plain gray coat and carrying a worn leather bag, and he was looking around the platform with the careful eyes of a man who was used to reading a place before walking into it. That was when she saw the gun. It was not hidden. It was on his hip the way a working tool sits on a man who uses it regularly. Not for show. Not with any kind of performance around it. Just there. A long-barreled Colt in a plain leather holster, worn at the edges, clearly used. And in the moment she saw it, something cold went through her that had nothing to do with the September air. She had not thought about guns. She had thought about steadiness and kindness, and the willingness to build something. She had thought about a rancher, a man who worked with cattle and rope and weather, a man with calloused hands and a practical mind. She had not thought about a gun on his hip like punctuation at the end of a sentence. She had written herself without knowing what it said. He spotted her. She could tell because his eyes stopped moving and settled on her in a way that was direct without being aggressive. He walked toward her, and she stood where she was and told herself not to say anything foolish. He stopped 2 feet away and took off his hat. "Miss Chen, Mr. Whitmore." There was a moment of quiet that was not exactly uncomfortable, but was very full. "I want to say something," she said, and her voice was steadier than she expected. "I want to say it now before either of us goes any further, because I think it matters." He waited. She noticed that he was the kind of man who waited without fidgeting. "I did not order a gunman," she said. "I wrote to a rancher. I made that very clear in my letters, I think. And I look at you right now, and I see a man with a Colt on his hip like he's expecting trouble before he's even said hello to the town. And I am going to need an explanation before I take another step." Something moved in his face that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite sadness. He looked down at his hip as though he had genuinely forgotten what was there, which she thought was probably the most unsettling part of all. "I can explain," he said. "You'd better," she said. They did not go to the laundry. She took him to the only decent cafe in Duskwell, a small place run by a woman named Mrs. Hartley who made good coffee and had the sense to take one look at the situation and leave them alone at a corner table with 2 cups and a plate of cornbread that neither of them touched. He told her the truth. She gave him credit for that later, when she had time to think about it. He didn't soften it or dress it up or try to make it sound like something it wasn't. He had been a rancher. That part was true. He had worked his land in Wyoming for 8 years, and he had been good at it. But the drought had not just taken the cattle. It had taken most of his savings, and when a man came around at the end of that second bad year offering to buy the land for less than it was worth, but more than Cole had any other way of getting, Cole had sold. He had been 30 years old with nothing but a horse, a bag, and a dead dream, and he had done what some men do in that situation, which was take the first paying work he could find. A rancher in Colorado named Denton had needed someone who could handle himself in country where rustlers were getting bold. Cole had taken the job as a range rider, which meant he spent 6 months sleeping under stars and persuading men who were stealing Denton's cattle to stop doing that, usually through conversation and occasionally through other means. He had not killed anyone. He said that plainly, and she believed him. But he had used the gun, and more than once, and it had gotten to a point where the gun felt as natural on his hip as a boot on his foot, which he said now, sitting across from her in Mrs. Hartley's cafe. He understood was not a comfortable thing for a woman running a laundry in a small town to look at. "I should have said something in the letters," he said. "I know that." "Yes," she said. "You should have. I thought it would end the conversation before it started." "It might end it now," she said. He looked at her steadily. "That's your right." She drank her coffee. He drank his. Outside, Duskwell went about its afternoon business. A dog barked somewhere. A wagon rattled past on the street. "Why did you answer my letter?" she asked. "Of all the women who might have advertised in that paper, why mine?" He thought about that. "You underlined what you wanted," he said. "Most people don't do that." Most people ask for things in a way that leaves them room to pretend they didn't really ask. You didn't. She looked at him for a long moment. He did not look away. I need 2 days, she said. All right. There's a rooming house on Calhoun Street. Mrs. Paz runs it. She's clean and she's fair, and she doesn't ask too many questions. Stay there. Don't make trouble. Don't flash that gun around. Let me think. Yes, ma'am, he said, and there was nothing mocking in it. She went home that night and sat at her kitchen table for a long time without lighting the lamp. She thought about the letters they had exchanged and how much of the man she had understood from them and how much she had filled in herself with what she wanted to see. She thought about the gun. She thought about the fact that he had told her the truth when lying would have been much easier and probably more effective. She thought about the way he had said that you're right, without argument or self-pity, as though the idea that she might be the one to decide something was simply how things worked. She thought about her father, who had been a quiet man who never once in his life owned a gun and who had died anyway, quickly and randomly, and without any defense against it, because life in the West in those years had very little interest in what a man deserved. In the morning she went to see Dolores at the dry goods store. Dolores listened to the whole story without interrupting, which was unusual for Dolores. When Lila finished, Dolores was quiet for a moment and then said, "Did he eat the cornbread?" "Neither of us ate the cornbread." "Nervous people don't eat," Dolores said. "A man who is lying to you is usually not nervous. He's too busy managing the lie." Lila thought about that. "I'm not saying marry him tomorrow," Dolores said. "I'm saying a man who tells you the hard thing and then sits there and lets you decide is not the same as a man who hides the hard thing and lets you find out later. One of those is worse than the other." Lila went back to the laundry and worked through the day and thought the whole time. She was still thinking when she closed up at 6 and walked down Calhoun Street, without quite admitting to herself that she was walking down Calhoun Street. She found him sitting on the front steps of the rooming house with his hat off and a piece of wood in one hand and a small knife in the other. He was carving something. She couldn't tell what yet. He looked up when he heard her footsteps and put both things in his lap. "Miss Chen, what are you carving?" she asked. He looked down at the piece of wood. "A horse," he said. "It won't be a good one. I'm not skilled at it, but it gives my hand something to do when my head is working on a problem." She sat down on the step beside him, which surprised them both. "Tell me about Wyoming," she said. "Not the drought. Before the drought." He was quiet for a moment, as though he was deciding whether to trust the question. Then he started talking. He told her about the mornings when the mountains were visible from his land and the light came in sideways and turned everything gold for about 20 minutes before it became just regular light again. He told her about a horse he had owned named Fletcher, who had been so stubborn that Cole had genuinely respected him for it. He told her about the satisfaction of fixing a fence post correctly, of knowing that you had done a thing right and that it would hold. She listened until the light began to change. "I'm going to ask you one question," she said finally, "and I need you to answer it without thinking about what I want to hear. Just answer it the way it's actually true." "All right. If Duskwell turned out to be a quiet town, really quiet, no trouble, no rustlers, no reason for a man to carry a gun, could you put that thing away and be a man who does ordinary work? Not forever, maybe, but could you try to become that man?" He looked at the half-finished horse in his hand. He didn't answer right away. She respected him for that, too. "I think so," he said at last. "I can't promise it like a man who's never held a gun can promise it, because it's not my natural starting point anymore. But I want to." "That's not nothing, is it?" It wasn't a question, but it wasn't quite a statement either. It was honest, which was what she had asked for. "No," she said. "That's not nothing." She gave him one more day, and then she made her decision. She went to the rooming house in the morning with a list of things she needed done at the laundry. A shelf that needed fixing, a back door that was hanging wrong, a water pump that required attention, and she told him that if he was still willing to proceed, he could start by being useful while they worked out the rest of it. He started that afternoon. He was good with his hands in the way that men who have worked land are good with their hands. Not elegant, but effective and thorough. The shelf was fixed by noon. The door was rehung by 2. The pump took longer because something inside it had corroded, and he went to the hardware store and spent 45 minutes talking to the man there about what was needed, and he came back and fixed it too. She fed him dinner that evening in the small kitchen behind the laundry. She cooked beans and salt pork and cornbread, and he ate everything on the plate and said it was good, which it was. They talked about practical things, what the laundry earned in a good month and a bad month, whether there was work for a man with the skills in dusk well, because she was not going to have a husband sitting idle and getting restless. He said he had talked to a man at the livery stable who was looking for someone who understood horses and cattle, and that there might be something there. It was not romantic. None of it was romantic in the way she had read about in books, the way it involved dramatic declarations and stolen glances. It was practical and careful and quiet, and somehow that made it feel more real than anything she had imagined before she started imagining it. They married 3 weeks later, in the office of the town justice, with Dolores and Mrs. Hartley as witnesses. Lila wore her good dress, which was lighter than the second best one, and which she liked better anyway. Cole wore a clean shirt and had gotten his hair cut, which she noticed and did not comment on. The justice read the words, and they said the parts they were supposed to say, and that was that. Dolores cried a little. Mrs. Hartley brought a cake. The first month was the hardest, because living with someone is a different education than corresponding with them, no matter how honest the correspondence. Cole was quieter in person than she had expected, which she came to understand was not coldness, but was simply the way he moved through the world. He thought before he spoke. He did not fill silence with noise the way some people did. She had lived alone long enough that this suited her, but it took some getting used to on both sides. The understanding that quiet was not unhappiness, that it was just quiet. He got the job at the livery stable. The man who ran it, a broad-shouldered Norwegian named Halvor, said Cole had a way with difficult horses that was worth something. Cole came home in the evening smelling of hay and honest work, and that smell, she found, was not unpleasant. He kept the gun. She had not asked him to get rid of it. That was important. She thought later that she had not demanded the impossible from him. She had asked him to try, and trying meant something different than being already finished. The gun stayed in the locked box under the bed, and weeks went by in which it stayed there, and she stopped thinking about it quite so much. What she had not expected, and what surprised her more than anything else in those early months, was that Cole Whitmore was funny. Not obviously, not in the way of men who told jokes and laughed loudly at them, but in a dry, unexpected way that surfaced at odd moments and was all the funnier for being rare. He said things sometimes that made her laugh when she was not expecting to laugh, and the first time it happened she looked at him, and he was already looking back at her with something in his expression that was almost shy, like a man who was pleased something had worked but wasn't entirely sure what he'd done. She told Dolores about this. Dolores said that was a very good sign. Better than handsome, she said. You get used to handsome in 3 weeks. Funny keeps. November brought cold and business. People wore heavier clothes and sent more to the laundry, and Lila was busy from before dawn until well after dark most days. Cole came in some evenings and helped without being asked, carrying loads, running water, doing the heavy work that made a real difference at the end of a long day. She was not used to having that help, and she found it changed something in her that she hadn't known was tight. One evening in the middle of that busy November, a man came into the laundry. She was alone. Cole was still at the livery. The man was not a regular customer. He was heavy-set, with a face that had been rearranged at some point in the past, a crooked nose, a scar along the jaw. He was not obviously threatening in any way she could name, but something in the way he stood in the doorway told her to be careful. He said he was looking for a man named Cole Whitmore. She said she didn't know anyone by that name, which was not her smoothest moment, but was what came out. The man looked at her in a way that said he knew she was lying, and was not bothered by it. He said he had some business with Whitmore, and that if she happened to know where he was, she might want to pass along a message. He said his name was Fraley, and that he and Whitmore had some unfinished accounting from up north. He left. She locked the front door and stood in the middle of the laundry with her hands clasped in front of her and breathed steadily until Cole came in through the back door at his usual time. She told him what had happened, word for word, calmly and without panic, because panic was not useful. Cole sat down. She watched his face go through something she could not quite read, something that was not fear but was its cousin, a kind of reckoning, a man calculating what is coming and deciding what to do about it. Then he told her about Fraley. Fraley was one of the rustlers from the Colorado operation. Cole had caught him in the act of running off a dozen of Denton's cattle, and had turned him over to the sheriff in the nearest town. Fraley had spent 8 months in jail, and had apparently spent a good portion of that time deciding what he would do when he got out. "I should have told you this before," Cole said. "I thought it was behind me." "It's not behind you," she said. "No." She sat across from him at the kitchen table. The lamp was between them. Outside, Duskwell was quiet. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to go talk to the sheriff tomorrow morning," he said. "Tell him what I know about Fraley. Let the law handle it if there's something to handle. And if the law can't." He looked at her steadily. "Then I'll handle it." She wanted to argue. She had the argument ready, the one about guns and trouble and the life she had built. But she sat with it for a moment before she said it, and realized it was the wrong argument for the moment, because the trouble had come looking for them, not the other way around, and no amount of insisting on a peaceful life was going to make a man like Fraley care about what she had ordered or not ordered. "Go to the sheriff first," she said. "Like you said, give the law the chance." "Yes, and come home safe," she said, which was the first time she had said anything like that to him, and it surprised her as much as it surprised him. He went to the sheriff the next morning. The sheriff was a capable man named Aldredge, who had been doing the job for 11 years, and who took the information about Fraley seriously, and said he would look into it. He also said that Fraley had a warrant outstanding from a county in Colorado for a separate matter, and that if he showed his face formally in Duskwell, there were grounds to hold him. For 3 days nothing happened, and the tension was like a smell in the air. On the 4th day, Fraley came back. This time it was evening, and Cole was home, and Fraley did not come to the laundry. He came to the street outside it, and called out loud enough for the whole block to hear that he wanted a conversation with Cole Whitmore, and that Cole Whitmore was a man who owed him something. Lila was standing by the window when it happened. Cole was putting on his coat. She watched him take the gun from the box under the bed and put it on his hip, and she felt the cold thing go through her again. That same thing she had felt on the train platform the first day. But it was different this time. It was not the shock of the unknown. It was the fear of the known, which is its own thing entirely. "Stay inside," he said. "Cole." He looked at her. Whatever he saw in her face, it was enough to make him stop for a moment. "I'm not going out there to shoot anyone," he said. "I'm going out there to end it. There's a difference." She knew there was a difference. She was not sure the difference would hold. He went out. She went to the window, which she had promised herself she would not do, and watched. Fraley was in the middle of the street. He was not alone. There was another man, shorter, who she didn't recognize, standing 20 feet to Fraley's left. Cole walked out to the edge of the boardwalk and stopped. She could not hear what was said, not all of it. She heard Fraley's voice rising and Cole's voice staying level. She saw Fraley take a step forward and Cole stand still. She saw the shorter man shift his weight. Then she saw Sheriff Aldredge come around the corner from the east with a deputy. And the quality of everything in the street changed in the way things change when a fourth person enters a room where 3 people are in the middle of something. Aldredge walked straight to Fraley and said something. Fraley's shoulders went rigid. The shorter man took 2 careful steps back. It went on for about 4 minutes, the conversation between Aldredge and Fraley, and then Fraley said something loud and ugly that she could hear through the glass, and Aldredge said something quiet back. And then the deputy put his hand on Fraley's arm, and Fraley shook it off, but did not run. And then he went along with him down the street toward the jail, and the shorter man disappeared somewhere in a direction she couldn't track. Cole stood in the street for a moment after they were gone. Then he turned and walked back to the laundry. She met him at the door. "Aldredge had him," Cole said. "Outstanding warrant. He'll be held for extradition to Colorado." She looked at him for a moment. "You knew Aldredge was coming." "I sent word this afternoon. Asked him to be ready." "You went out there knowing he was coming," she said, understanding it now. "You went out there to keep Fraley busy and visible in the street long enough for Aldredge to get there." That was the idea. She was not sure whether to be angry or relieved. She was both, in roughly equal proportions. "You could have told me that before you walked out," she said. "I didn't know for certain it would work." he said simply. If I had told you the plan, and then Aldrich hadn't come, it would have been worse for you than not knowing. She thought about that. It was not a perfect logic, but it was a kind logic. The distinction mattered to her. Come inside, she said. I made supper. He came inside. They ate supper. They talked about small things. The laundry, the livery, whether the winter was going to be hard or easy. The gun went back in the box. The box went back under the bed. What she understood, in the weeks that followed, was something she had not quite been able to articulate when she wrote that letter in her small kitchen a season earlier and underlined her intentions with dark ink. She had thought she was ordering a specific kind of man, a safe man, a settled man, a man who had already finished becoming something and would simply be that thing when he arrived. She had thought she could specify him the way she could specify the starch content of a shirt. Precise, controlled, predictable. That was not how it worked. That was not how any of it worked. What she had gotten instead was a man in process, which is the only kind of man that exists. A man who had been one thing and was trying to become another, who was honest about the distance between those 2 points, who showed up and did the work even when the work was hard, who used the law when the law was available and stood in the street to buy time when it wasn't. A man who carved horses badly with a small knife because it gave his hand something to do when his head was working on a problem, and who had a dry and unexpected humor that surfaced at odd moments and was all the better for being rare. She thought about the word ordered, which she had used in anger on the train platform, and she understood now why it had always been the wrong word. You did not order a person. You chose one, carefully and with as much information as you could gather, and then you lived with that choice and let it become something neither of you could have specified in advance. The living was the thing. The living was where it actually happened. Spring came. The laundry was busy in a different way in spring. Lighter clothes, but more of them, and people airing out the winter from everything they owned. Cole's work at the livery had grown into something more substantial. Halvor had given him responsibility for the buying and selling of horses, which suited him. He was good at reading horses and good at reading the men who wanted to buy them, which turned out to be related skills. On a Saturday morning in April, when the light was coming through the laundry windows sideways and turning everything gold for about 20 minutes the way it did in that season, Cole came in from the back with a cup of coffee for her without being asked, and she was elbow deep in someone's sheets, and she said thank you without looking up, and he set it on the shelf and went back to what he was doing, and there was something in that small and ordinary exchange that she understood was the thing she had actually been looking for all along. Not a man on a platform, not a letter in a sealed envelope, not a set of specifications met with precision. Just this, someone moving through the same space as her without friction, doing the next useful thing, present in the way that mattered. She drank her coffee when she had a free hand. Outside, Duskwell went about it Saturday. There was a woman in town, Mrs. Caldwell, who had heard the story of Lila's matrimonial advertisement through the inevitable channels of small-town information, and who had said in the hearing of several people that it was a peculiar and unromantic way to find a husband. Lila heard this second-hand from Dolores, who had told Mrs. Caldwell, also in the hearing of several people, that unromantic and unworking were 2 very different things, and that she should mind her biscuits. Lila thought about it sometimes. The romance question, whether what she had built with Cole was romantic or not. She wasn't sure it was the right question. Romance in the books was made of grand gestures and overwhelming feelings, the kind that swept you off your feet before you could see where you were going. What she had was different. It was something that had been built piece by piece, out of honest letters and hard conversations and small daily acts, a shelf fixed correctly, and a door rehung, and a cup of coffee set on a shelf at the right moment. It was quieter than the book said it should be, but it was also, she had come to believe, more solid. A thing built right holds longer than a thing that just looks good. That summer, on an evening when they were sitting on the step of the laundry because the inside was still too warm from the day's work, Cole took the small piece of wood from his coat pocket and handed it to her. It was the horse he had been carving on and off since September, finally finished. It was not a great carving. He had said as much. The legs were a little uneven and the neck was perhaps too short, but it looked unmistakably like a horse in motion, caught mid-step, about to go somewhere. Its head turned slightly as though something to the side had caught its attention. She held it in both hands. "It's Fletcher," he said, "or my best attempt." She looked at it for a moment, and then at him. "It's good," she said. He looked at the horse with the critical eye of a man who knew its flaws better than anyone. "It's honest," he said finally. "I'll give it that." She set it on the windowsill of the laundry where the morning light hit first, and it stayed there after that. A small wooden horse with slightly uneven legs, mid-step, head turned, about to go somewhere it couldn't yet see. She thought sometimes, walking past it in the early hours before the laundry filled with noise and steam, that it was a better description of most things worth having than anything she could have put in a letter. You start with what you know. You say it honestly. You stand in the space between where you are and where you are going, and you keep moving, and you let the living be the thing. That was the whole of it, really. She had written a letter looking for a husband, and she had gotten a man, and the difference between those two things had turned out to be the most important education she had ever received. A husband was a category. A man was a person. A person was unspecifiable, uncontrollable, full of history and contradiction and unexpected capability. And the only way to know one was to be present with one, honestly and over time, and let the knowing build the way good walls build slowly, with solid materials, set on ground that has been tested for what it can hold. She was glad she had underlined her intentions. She was glad he had read them carefully. She was glad she had given him 2 days and then put him to work, and that he had come back the next morning and fixed a water pump without being asked twice. She was glad of the letters and the cornbread neither of them ate and the dry joke that had made her laugh when she wasn't expecting to, and the night he had stood in the street, not to shoot anyone, but to keep a man visible long enough for the law to arrive. She was glad of all of it, including the parts that had been hard, because the hard parts were where she had learned the most about both of them, and what she had learned was enough, more than enough. It was the right kind of foundation, imperfect but honest, tested and held. Outside, the territory was wide and mostly unfinished, still figuring out what it wanted to be, full of people trying to build something lasting on ground that had never been easy. She understood something about that. She was part of it. They both were. She picked up the next shirt from the pile and got back to work. The moral is simple and hard in equal measure. You cannot order a person into being what you need. You can only find one who is honest about what they are, and be honest yourself in return, and then do the work of becoming something together, which is the only way anything real is ever built.